Our program tonight, Mark Afman is a Colorado third-generation resident. He loves Colorado history and loves sharing his photographs, his knowledge through photographs. Mark was inspired by John Fielder. He has been producing these types of images for 15 years and has a Facebook following of over 15,000. Mark has given several presentations in Grand County, Georgetown, the Conifer Historical Society, and at Windcrest. Please welcome Mark Afman. Before we do that, I have an announcement to make. Our July program has been changed. It was supposed to be about a horse that was dissected surgically, the first animal to be found that way. Unexplained how that happened. Well, because of the recent ability for UFO people to come out and talk about what they have seen and what they know and everything, we are going to have a different program. Our program is going to be by a researcher, Katie Page, who has a foundation, UFO Foundation, who has been on the History Channel, who has done a lot of research and interviews pertaining to aliens, space aliens, and UFOs. Our program, which will be in July, and I'm letting you know so that if you're interested, you can make your summer plans around this program. I would. Is going to be about the investigations that Katie did on the alien, space alien from Roscoe. The space alien is here in Denver. It is our space alien. It was at the Fitzsimmons Hospital. And it was at the Owen Church mortuary. That will be a very interesting program. I'm sure you will enjoy it. Well, be surprised. Yes? It's a third Monday. Our program's always a third Monday evening of the month. And now, without any further ado, please welcome Mark Afman.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm sorry, I'm sitting on a stool, so I'm going to put my screen up, and some of you won't be able to see my face, but that's probably a good thing. Anyway, as I mentioned here, I am a third-generation native of Denver. My dad was born down around Downing at Evans, and they used to call that Little Holland, because that's where a lot of the Dutch folks used to live. And that's his mom and dad both immigrated from Holland. And actually, the gentleman up here earlier, Forrest Dykstra, turns out that we've got a little connection. He used to go to the same church as I did. So it was good to kind of hook up with him. One more thing I do want to mention that my brother is here, and he's taking some pictures.
That's unusual.
Bear with me, I like to have a little something to remember by it. But Dave, he helps me out so much. A lot of the pictures that you see in this presentation, he helped me. He drove me around and did help things to help me out. So, could you please just give a lot of appreciation? Okay. How many of you have seen the John Fielder book? Okay, a bunch. that well, then you know where I got my inspiration. It was just fascinating to me that you could stand in the same place as someone did, 100 and some odd years ago, and you've got proof because it's right there in the picture. And that's what got me started on all this. I've got over 1,800 pairs of photographs from all over the state. I got to figure out a way to make a living doing this, but I enjoy it and I appreciate the support of my family and such. And there was one more thing I was going to say, and with my memory, it has completely gone away. So if I remember it, I'll get back to you. But let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start with the property that is the Highlands Ranch mansion. Now, this is Samuel Allen Long. That's the picture of him. And he was born in Pittsburgh in 1827. He moved to Denver in 1880, and he homesteaded the land that the mansion now sits on in 1884. And by 1891, he had built a small stone farmhouse, and he called it Rotherwood. And because that was a farm that he knew back in Pennsylvania. And so this same building is still part of the structure. They added on to it, but it's still there. So you can see that plaque, or that stone that's underneath the window there, and it has 1891 carved into it. Now, in 1897, let me just make sure this plays. You've seen this, but that's okay. He sold it to John Springer. Springer had purchased several small ranches in Douglas County, and eventually he consolidated them into the 12,000-acre Springer cross-country horse and cattle ranch. Springer renovated it to the basic mansion that we own today. There's been other renovations since then, but if it was just a little stone farmhouse, it would be, you wouldn't even recognize it. So this is the work of John. Now, in 1897, he sold it, pardon me, let's go on. There we go. John was originally married to his first wife, and she passed away of tuberculosis. He remarried in 1907 to Isabel. Don't know her last name, but this brought on a rather dark episode in the history of the mansion. John would often travel away from Denver on business trips. He left his young bride out at the mansion with not much to do. You can imagine, back then, that mansion was way out in the country. There were no houses. There was Littleton and a little bit in Inglewood, but even beyond that, there wasn't much past Cherry Creek. So she was out here by herself, and she didn't have much to do. So she would take a carriage down to Littleton, catch the Denver Rio Grande Railroad into Denver, and then she would go to the Brown Palace and rent a room. Well, she was fond of the nightlife, let's put it that way, and she got herself into some trouble because she ended up getting into a love triangle. And one of the men, a man named Tony Von Fole, tried to blackmail her by threatening to expose the affair with her husband. Well, she got the other gentleman, Frank Henwood, to intervene, and unfortunately he took it too far and ended up killing Von Fole and an innocent bystander in the Marble Bar at the Brown Palace. Now the Marble Bar is still there. It's not called the Marble anymore, but it's on the Broadway side of where the Brown Palace, and that's where the original main entrance used to be. So as soon as John Springer found out about this, he immediately divorced her and soon sold the ranch, and she was forced to leave Denver, and she died of a morphine addiction in New York City. And we'll slide. Now, between 1911, when that murder happened, and by the way, if you ever want to read up on that, there's a great book called Murder at the Brown Palace Hotel. And if you're interested, it goes into great depth about the whole episode. So between that time and 1937, the mansion was owned by a few different families, including William Hughes, Waite Phillips of the Phillips 66 oil chain, and a man named Frank Kessler. Now, this next slide might perplex you a little bit. I'm showing this because, first of all, on the left-hand side, that's Lawrence Phillips Jr. He purchased the ranch, and he lived there until his death in 1976. Now, the Phipps family has been involved with some of the most philanthropic endeavors in the area's history. The man in the middle you see there, in the old photo with the cane, is Lawrence Phipps Sr. He was a Colorado senator, and he built that mansion that's in the Belle Carroll area, right near Colorado Boulevard and, Exposition. And that building was, if you may recall, when President, man, my memory's going, come on. This is ridiculous. Clinton, sorry about that. When President Clinton had that G8 conference here in Denver, they used the Phipps Mansion for several different meetings. Now, Lawrence Phipps Sr., his father, had built a tuberculosis sanitarium out in what is now the Lowry neighborhood near 6th Avenue in Quebec. And those buildings are gone now. And Lawrence Phipps Jr. helped fund the Denver Foundation. He funded Children's Hospital, and he continued his support of the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. Now, I've been here my whole life. When I was a kid, that was called the Denver Museum or the Denver Natural History Museum. Anybody remember that? Okay. And then a few years ago, they changed it to the Museum of Nature and Science. So anyway, we're going to move on here. And I use these photos as a way of kind of tying in the Phipps family and the Brown Palace Hotel to the mansion. Lawrence Phipps Sr., he thought, as I mentioned, he built the place in Belle Carroll, and his other son, Gerald Phipps, owned the Denver Broncos for a time. Now we're going to start with the presentation starting up here in Castle Rock. Now this is a picture that was taken by William Henry Jackson, a very famous photographer of that time, in Castle Rock. And, you know, if you looked at it now and looked at the picture that I put up there, you would never know that an entire metropolis had grown up around this rock. So anyway, Castle Rock was officially founded in 1874. It was incorporated in 1881. It evolved from a small cluster of prospector shacks into the thriving community that you know today. Original home to Arapaho and Cheyenne and Sioux tribes. Years development was sparked by rumors of gold, but its lasting foundation was built on a unique volcanic stone, and it's a granite zone called rhyolite. And it's it built on a strategic position along a major trade route from the Plum Creek area all the way up and down. Has been used for years as a way to trade. And a side note here, in 1936, during the Depression, town leaders decided that it would lift the spirits of the community to have a star built and put it up on the rock, and it shines at night. and my understanding, tell me if I'm wrong, if anybody knows, but it's still in use today. Yeah, okay, good. Now, Jeremiah Gould was the man who donated the land for Castle Rock, and it became a key railroad shipping point. Eventually, this transformed the economy from a rustic quarry and ranch community to the town that has over 90,000 residents today. Now, this building is also the building of the Castle Rock Journal. It was a pivotal newspaper in Douglas County, operating from roughly the late 1800s to the early 1900s. This building, the paper was based in the wood building located at 310 4th Street. It's still there. It was built originally by William Cantrell, and their family was one of the original families of Castle Rock. And he built that in 1874 and first served as a Douglas County courthouse. Now it's a little tea shop. So if you get a tea, go up to 310 4th Street in Castle Rock, and I'm sure they would appreciate it if you go in and buy something. Okay, now the next part of this is the Denver Rio Grande Railroad was founded in 1870 by William Jackson Palmer. Obviously the name Palmer Divide comes from that. He was a Medal of Honor recipient. He was a Union general in the Civil War, and he built it initially as a narrow gauge line south from Denver through Douglas County up Plum Creek. In around 1871, it reached the area that we're in now, and this critical route provided rapid transportation for passengers and freight, and that kind of fundamentally shifted the economy towards industrialization, farming, away from gold and silver. Now they changed the track to a standard gauge, and that's what's still in use today, and it's owned by the Union Pacific Railroad. Now note something, William Jackson Palmer also built the Glen Erie Castle as his personal residence. Well, I'm sorry, not used to using one of these things. But the Glen Erie Castle's down in Castle Rock, or Colorado Springs, right next to Garden of the Gods. And it's now a place, my family have had 2 different reunions there. So it's really an excellent place to go see. And I just popped this in just to show you a little something. That's Highway 85 and I-25 looking south. It was a little cloudy the day I took this picture, so you can't see if I speak. But if you look at the horizon, you can see that I'm pretty close to the same spot. And so that picture was taken from the frontage road just south of Plum Creek Parkway. And that's what it used to look like, a little dirt road. And now we're going to go to Daniels Park. If you've ever been downtown, you have noticed the iconic D&F clock tower at 16th and Arapahoe. That used to be connected to a huge retail store that was considered one of the finest stores west of the Mississippi. One of the owners' name was William Daniels. He and his wife, when he and his wife passed away, they had a very close friend named Florence Martin. Well, Florence owned a lot of land along the hill behind us, where Daniels Park is. And she wanted to donate 38 acres in memory of them, so she offered it to Douglas County, but Douglas County would not pave the road. So around 1920, she found that the Denver city had a series of mountain parks, and she donated the land to the city of Denver, and just requesting that it bear the Daniels name. So that's where Daniels Park comes from. Now, as I mentioned, Florence Martin owned the land over the ridge there. And you will maybe driven by there and seen a barn and a silo, and that was part of Florence Martin's original property. Now there's a story that Sarah asked me to tell. One day her nephew and some friends went to visit her, and they decided that they were going to rob her of some of her material and wealthy possessions. Well, somehow she convinced them that she didn't have anything in the house. It was all at the bank. And she was going to send her chauffeur to go get them and come back with them. Well, these young men apparently weren't very smart, because the chauffeur never went to the bank. He went to the sheriff and brought him back, and these boys were all arrested. And she's considered a pretty smart lady for being able to outwit them. And next we have, this is a great picture from 1925, right about the time Daniels Park was created. And it shows a vista looking southwest over Palm Creek Valley. Now in the original picture you can see that it's just a really nice, very, very little development there. And then in the 2026 picture, you can see the same thing, except all that snow is covering that golf course. And the golf course, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second, but it's also, Daniels Park has also housed part of the bison herd, and has done this since 1938. And then part of the park, about 80 acres, is dedicated to the Tall Pole Memorial Grounds to site for Native American ceremonies. And now we're going to talk about how this golf course came to be. Is there any real estate related people in here? Any agents, anybody that was been in the real estate business? Okay. You might know anyway, my dad was a realtor from the late 60s until 2010 when he retired. And he had mentioned that he went, a couple times he met a guy named Dave Leninger. Well, Dave and his wife Gail started a little company here in Denver called Remax. Maybe you've heard of it. And anyway, after, they had some struggles in the beginning, but obviously they turned into one of the largest real estate companies in the world. They built a ranch just on the other side of the ridge here, and that's their home. And then they built a golf course called the Sanctuary, right next to Daniels Park. So when I first saw that years ago, it kind of frustrated me. It was kind of taking a little bit away from that beautiful view. But I've also come to find out that several times a year they do some tournaments that benefit things like the Children's Network and such. And that kind of softens my view, that knowing that they also do many things that are beneficial for the community with that. There. So now we're going to go to Sedalia. Sedalia was established by John Craig in 1859. It was originally called the Round Corral Livestock Center, and there was a sawmill there. And this is right at the junction of Plum Creek and West Plum Creek. Later it was called Plum Station, and then it was a key railroad line for the Denver Grant. And then later, they built this depot for the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad. Now, I don't know the story whether that building was moved, because it's nowhere near the railroad tracks now, but either they moved the tracks to where they are now, or they moved that depot, and it's now a private residence. Now, originally, Utarembo settled settled in the gold rush, and there was a logging out there in Sedalia, and today it's a growing group of residences and small businesses. The community, I know some people that live there, and it's really trying to hold on to that small town feel, but you know, Castle Rock is encroaching. So now we move on. One of the settlers changed the name to Sedalia as honoring his hometown of Sedalia, Missouri. This home was built in 1876 by John Craig, the founder, and he sold it to a Frenchman named Marquis Victor, and he was considered, a mover and a shaker in town, and it was kind of the social hub of the community at the time. Now, Victor was a leader of the community, as I mentioned, but his life ended tragically when he was shoeing a horse, and the horse kicked him in the chest. At the time, his funeral was reported to be one of the largest gatherings in Douglas County at the time. And that home is still there, it's still a private residence. And how many were here in 1965? There's a few. So you remember the flood, I'm assuming. In 1965, a catastrophic flood started above Larkspur, because Larkspur was washed out, Castle Rock was affected, and so was Sedalia. Many of its buildings were washed away, including the Presbyterian Church. Currently, the Sedalia is an unincorporated community of around 170 people, and it's known for its historic homes, the Sedalia Museum, and of course, Bud's Bar. If who's been to Bud's? Okay. That's cheeseburgers you love to see. It's kind of a throwback to the old bar and cafe of the 50s, but it's a great place to go. So now we're going to move to Louviers. Now, Louviers is a small hamlet just a few miles west of Sedalia. I keep hitting that button, I apologize. Come on. There we go. Now, it began in 1906, and Louviers was a company town. It was owned and operated by DuPont. DuPont was looking for a place to build a dynamite manufacturing plant, and they decided that this was an area that was far enough away from the city to be safe, but close enough where it could get the resources it needed. They decided all of the homes were built and owned by the company and rented to the workers. A plant supplied many of the explosives used in the building of our highways and tunnels, including the mountain tunnel. And here's the side-by-side. This is actually the home of the plant manager, and now it's a private residence. And Dave helped me take that picture. And we met the owner, and he was very nice about letting us take that picture. But DuPont set up the homes in kind of a class system. Further up on the hill were these houses for the managers, and right next door to these houses, the house of the company doctor named Dr. Dumpke, and he apparently delivered over 5,000 children in the Louviers area over the years. And then just below that is a series of smaller homes that they had built for the workers. Now, in 1917, the company built this community clubhouse. It was built to try to attract and retain long-term employees. It had a library, a small store, a billiard room, and believe it or not, a bowling alley. Along with a large hall that could be used for gatherings. It was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1995. A large renovation happened there between 2001 and 2007. It's currently owned by the county, and it's staffed by volunteers. But you can stop in there, and it's a great place. They will give you a bunch of information. And there's the side-by-side. You can see the way things have changed over the years. DuPont began to invest in Southwood properties in the early 1960s, and the plant closed in the 1980s. DuPont still owns much of the land around Louviers, and has reportedly committed to not developing that land. So there's a little safe zone around Louviers. Now, this next slide kind of has a personal nature to me. This farmhouse is located at the end of West Titan Road. So if you drive out from Highway 85 on Titan Road, it comes to a place where it curves to the left and goes out to the Arrowhead Golf Course. Well, there's this little house on the side, and that house was built by the Rosedale family. They had immigrated from the Netherlands and came from the Dutch Reformed Church tradition. And even though they lived out south of where the Chatfield Reservoir is, they were members of the Christian Reformed Church, which was located down near Evans and Downey. Sorry. And my parents and grandparents were from that same tradition and attended the same church. My dad was the same age as many of their children, and I actually went to Denver Christian schools with many of the grandchildren of the Rosedales. And I'm still friends with some of them today. So my father recalled once that they were invited out to the Rosedales farm, the whole church. And so one Sunday afternoon, they all got in their little Model Gs and Model As, and they chugged down Santa Fe to this farm and had a picnic there with the Rosedales. And in the 60s, one of their grandsons, who I still know to this day, he invited some of his friends out, and that land is right along the South Platte River. And so we camped in a little spot there. Later on, of course, he was taken over to make Chatfield Reservoir. And one little last story. This is a story that always kind of trips me up, but when Monty was in his 90s, the family celebrated what turned out to be his last birthday by bringing him out to Chatfield Reservoir. He was in a wheelchair, and he wanted to walk down the good one-bike path south along the South Platte River. At one point, he stopped, and with great effort, he stood up. And he said, I know where the boundary of my land was. I'm going to stand on my land. And that is a story that they related to me. And, you know, it was a special memory for the family because he died shortly after that. So anyway. So now you probably recognize this. This is Highway 85, right where the railroad tracks crossover. This is about the 1950s. And, you know, when I was a kid, once in a while we would drive out here and we would go over that one bridge. Now, of course, it's 3 lanes in both directions, and it's got 2 bridges because the railroad's got a northbound and a southbound. So I just thought I'd include that to let you guys know what that used to look like. Now, their life, as I mentioned, my family and I would travel out to Rosedale's farm or go out to Sedalia once, and we'd cross over that bridge. So now let's get to Littleton. The beginnings of Littleton as a community can be traced to the gold rush of 1859. Now, along with gold seekers came merchants and farmers to provide the necessities of life. Denver obviously became the main town of the area, and the need arose to construct a series of ditches to carry water from the South Platte to the farms and businesses. Now, due to the fact that we obviously live in a pretty semi-arid area, if you're from the east and you moved here, you know what I'm talking about. My wife was from Michigan, and when she first came out here, it was pretty hard on her because it was so dry for her. But anyway, the need rose to arrive, dig these ditches. And this includes the city ditch, which meanders through Englewood out of the South Platte River, goes through South Denver, and it goes through Wash Park. So if you've been to Wash Park and you see that little water waste through the park, that's the old city ditch. And it's called the oldest working thing in Denver. Now, among the engineers hired to find that system was Richard Sullivan Little of New Hampshire. And as he was surveying several miles south of Denver, Little fell in love with the site of where Littleton is now. So here's a side-by-side showing that photo looking down Main Street. Upon filing Simone's dead claims, Richard brought his wife Angeline from the east in 1862. The dry climate all but cured her asthmatic condition, and they began to farm. And then the Littletons joined several neighbors to build the Rough and Ready flour mill in 1867. This provided a solid economic base for the community for years to come. Now, in 1872, the Littles filed a plot to subdivide their property into the village of Littleton, where the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad reached it. Settlement began at a rapid pace. Now, by this time, Colorado stated in 1876, there were schools, churches, hotels, stores, and many of the other things that come along with the town. In 1890, 245 residents of Littleton voted to incorporate the town. And I'm sorry, here's the video. Let me just show that real quick. And this is another picture my brother helped me with. You see that really nice Chevy Camaro there on the side. So moving on. Agriculture remained the staple industry of Littleton until after World War II, beginning with electronics and pneumatics, moving to munitions, and finally to aerospace manufacturing. That became a really important employer for the area. And then they also added Aramco Community College in 1965, and Chatfield Reservoir was built in 1972. Now, Chatfield was built in response to that flood. That it's a flood protection for the rest of, for Denver and such. Now this is the Leach House. As you know, Littleton is a one-way street on down Main Street going west, and then there's another going east, the next about a block away, and that's called Alamo Street. This property is at 2596 West Alamo, and it was designed and built by a local a man who worked at the mill, being Highlands Ranch. And it's a rather wonderful example of middle class going on. In 1897, it also hosted the first meeting of the Littleton Women's Club. Now, between 1903 and 1957, the Phillips family owned it, and in the last 2 decades of that time, it was a rental. But after that, it was restored and transformed into a professional house, and it currently houses a law firm there. And the city of Littleton officially designated it as a historic landmark in 2000. Now, one more thing I want to mention about Littleton is that if you want to learn more about the Littleton history, go to the Littleton Museum. It's a free Smithsonian-affiliated institution featuring indoor galleries and 2 19th century living history farms, one from the 1860s and one from the 1890s. It features costumes and interpreters, historic buildings, and specializes in it. It's at 6028 South Platte Street. So if you want to learn more, please check it out. Now we're going to go to Morrison's. This is Morrison in 1878. Morrison is world renowned for rocks. Rocks that they make buildings out of, rocks that they dug out of the ground as fossils, and rock and roll. Native American groups, including the Ute Indians, inhabited that area for good 8,000 years before we ever showed up. In 1877, Arthur Lynx discovered the first Stegosaurus on the Kodama back, and that started what is called the bone wars of the 19th century. A lot of private paleontologists were all trying to find the same thing. Now, the modern town was shaped by its namesake, George Morrison. He was a Scottish-born stonemason. He owned the quarries in the area, and he plotted the town in 1872, and it was incorporated in 1906. And his son, Thomas Morrison, served as the first mayor. And then this is a shot from above in 1885. Morrison was built on stone. Sandstone, lime, and gypsum were all quarried near there. And it was used to build some iconic Denver landmarks like Union Station. In 1874, the Denver South Park Pacific Railroad arrived, serving as the town's lifeblood and transporting buildings, stone out and bringing tourists in. Now, if you look, I'm going to go back to this, I'll just go forward to this. If you look in the old photograph, at the bottom, just a little bit to the right of center, you'll see some railroad tracks. Those are the tracks of the Denver South Park Pacific. It came up, that was the first track that they ever laid, was to Morrison. Now, of course, it would go on to follow the Platte River up to the North Fork, where the historic South Platte Hotel is. Then it would follow the North Fork up past Foxton and Buffalo Creek and Pine Grove. Eventually would go past Bailey, the Glen Isle Complex, and eventually up over Kenosha Pass and Tacoma and places beyond that. Now, as I mentioned, the first rail line they did was from the area of about where Hampton and Santa Fe is now, and followed Bear Creek up to Morrison. And there's a few little spots along there that still have evidence of those train tracks. Now this is a shot that I took, and I had to actually ask the lady to go into her backyard, and she was gracious enough to let me do that. But as the quarry industry declined, Morrison shifted towards tourism, largely due to its closeness to the natural attractions like Red Rocks. The Morrison Historic District was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1976. Some of the buildings, like the Cliff House and the Morrison Schoolhouse, still stand today. That schoolhouse is a private residence. And the town survived some devastating floods in 1933 and 1938, and a major fire in 1931. And now we move on to Red Rocks. Red Rocks was originally called the Garden of the Angels, and it's been called some things. But before Denver was settled, Red Rocks is believed to have been a sacred place for the Ute tribe. In 1870, people began to notice that when they were up on the hill, they could hear conversations of people down by what they call State Rock. And it just kind of was amazing. And so then in 1910, John Brisbane Walker, who was the owner of Cosmopolitan magazine, started buying Red Rocks and the land around it. He wanted to create an amusement park. Now, in 1911, Mary Garden, who was a world-famous Scottish soprano, sang the first solo concert at Red Rocks. And people just climbed up the hill and sat down. And she declared, never in any opera house in the world over have I found more perfect acoustic properties than those at Creation Rock and the National Auditorium at Mount Morrison. So that kind of tells you why they built such a great venue and why so many people want to go and listen to music there. Now, the Red Rocks Trading Post was constructed in 1931. It is one of the oldest structures in the park, predating the actual amphitheater by 10 years. It was built to harmonize with the natural landscape, and it's the first stop for tourists going into the park at the time. Originally known as the Indian Concessions House and Red Rocks Pueblo, it was designed to house a museum showcasing local flora, fauna, and geology. Now, the building functioned as a tourist hub, offering refreshments and selling antiques and such to visitors. Yeah, built in the early 1930s as part, as I mentioned. It was part of the, it was built by the Synthetic Conservation Corps, and they worked on the actual amphitheater starting in around 1935 when Denver bought the property. And then it was finished and opened in 1941. There is a trading post trail that goes around the rocks there. And the trading post is surrounded by unique features, including a historic well. Now, back in the 30s, cars could climb up hills very well without overheating. And so that well was there to try to help provide water to cool their cars. From 2015 until 2024, the trading post housed the Colorado Music Hall of Fame Museum. And that was moved up to the spot above the amphitheater since then. And just a couple of last slides here. In 1927, Denver purchases 65 acres around Red Rocks and began to fix up the roads and the trading post building. And then in 1935, construction begins on the amphitheater. And as I mentioned, it was opened in 1941. Now, just on a personal note, I have to say that I've been to many, many concerts at Red Rocks over the years. One show, through an amazing twist of circumstances, I had backstage passes to a Grateful Dead concert. I've been to many other concerts there. In fact, I most recently saw a concert with my daughter, the Afman brothers. They are real good. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. And I'm assuming hoping there's time for some questions. Yeah, I think we're going to have a microphone here.
Thank you very much.
Forrest? Oh, he's good, okay.
All right, thank you, Mark. It was a great presentation, and I enjoyed it. It was interesting when the Rosedale house that you talked about. Some of my best friends and actually my hunting partners are grandsons of the Rosedale family, so it's kind of like a cool presentation. So, okay, any questions?
That picture along the Titan Road there, is that before Sterling Ranch or after Sterling Ranch going towards Red Rocks? I mean going towards Roxborough. That picture on Titan Road?
Yeah.
Okay, the Rosedale house on Titan
Road, she was taken of the Rosedale farmhouse in 1920.
Okay. The location of it, is it before or after?
Oh, it's the same location for both photographs. I don't know what I mean.
No.
Before and after.
house was a farm and had other farms in the area. And by the way, speaking of that, one of the daughters, her name was Lorraine Rosenell also, and she was interviewed by the Douglas County Library, and that is available online as a sound, just a, not a film, but a sound. If you Google Rosenell Family Farm Memories or something like that, under the Douglas County Libraries, you should find it. And it really is fascinating, because she recalled several of the things that their family went through during that time.
Any other questions?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. A question on the Rosendale farm and a little bit of trivia. The Arthur Lake discovery of the Stegosaurus. Arthur Lake is also famous for being the first geologist to ever depict flesh on bones of a dinosaur. Sort of a little bit of trivia there. On the Rosendale farm, did it survive intact without any damage? The 65 flood, was it out of the path enough?
What's that?
Without any damage from.
I was wondering if it was actually out of the path of the 65 flood.
Yeah, the Rosendale farm is further, actually it's right on the banks of the South Platte. So the Rosendale farm, at the time, and the flood didn't come down the Waterton Canyon, it came from Polk Creek. And so they were right next to the South Platte River, so the flood never came anywhere near that. Yeah.
She wanted to know if you enjoyed the Grateful Dead show.
Is that right? Did I enjoy it? Oh, you bet. I'm somewhat of a deadhead. I've been to several Rim Rocks shows and a couple up in Boulder, and they had very strict rules. You could be backstage, but you couldn't talk to the band. And you had very restricted about where you could go. So at one point during their intermission, the band plays this kind of a musical part, and the drummers start, and then later on the band comes up, and the drummers come down. Well, as the drummers are coming down from doing their little part of that for the intermission, Mickey Hart, who's over the drummers, he comes by and walks, and I had a buddy of mine there, and he said, "Oh, hey guys, how you doing?" And we're like, "Real good, man. How you doing?" But that was really amazing.
Did you tell me how you got that?
Oh, I used to work at a medical supply oxygen company, and I got a call. I was working the desk, and I got a call from the guy, and he said, "Hey, we need some oxygen up here for the band that's playing." And all of a sudden it's connected. It's like, we couldn't get tickets, they sold out. And I said, "Is that the Grateful Dead?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "I'll tell you what, you get me tickets, I'll bring you up the oxygen." And he said, "I'll tell you one better, I'll give you backstage passes." So I brought up a little tank of oxygen, back at that time, I was around 85 or so. And, those guys were kind of getting older. Red Rocks is pretty high in elevation, they need some oxygen. So, but yeah, that was a very fun experience.
I'm going to tell you a little story about Dick Craig, who wrote Murder at the Brown Palace. You know about Murder at the Brown Palace? About Springer, Isabel? Well, he and his publisher were in New York before his book came out, and he found out, they discovered that there was not a marker marker on Isabel's grave. So Daddy bought a marker for her. And he told us, even from the grave, Isabel was having men do things for him, for her.
Okay, one more question? Any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much.